I'm Jessica Layton in New York. It is about 1:20 a.m. in the East, and we're coming on the air with breaking news right now. Several people have been injured in New York after an airplane collided with a vehicle on the runway at LaGuardia Airport. The plane, we're told, was an Air Canada flight. The vehicle, some sort of Port Authority vehicle. The airport now is under a full ground stop as emergency responders swarm that scene to tend to the injured and, of course, begin this investigation. Let's bring in NBC News senior producer Jay Blackman. Jay, what can you tell us about this chaotic and panicked scene at LaGuardia right now?
So what we know is that Air Canada flight was coming in from Montreal, Canada. It's Air Canada Jazz, which is one of their regional affiliates. It appears that upon landing, they struck some type of Port Authority vehicle on the runway. Right now, all we have confirmed is that at least 4 are injured.
4 are injured. And do we know, Jay, are they passengers on the plane? Are they perhaps people who were in that vehicle owned by the Port Authority?
It's the early moments of this investigation, so I think it's probably too early to tell. The NTSB and the FAA will both be part of this investigation, as well as, I'm sure, the law enforcement and Port Authority folks. Port Authority runs the 3 New York airports. It was raining in New York tonight, so there might be some visibility issues, but again, all of that is too early to tell.
You know, the question that we're seeing and that we're getting from many people online and here in person in the studio is, first of all, how does this happen? Could this be connected to some of the partial government shutdown that we're seeing that is affecting TSA right now? And conceivably, the permission for that vehicle to be on the runway would come from the controller. So do we know anything yet about where a potential communication breakdown occurred and how this even happened, how this could happen?
I mean, there would definitely have been, that vehicle would have absolutely have needed permission from a controller to cross. I do not think that you can equate this to the partial government shutdown. The FAA and air traffic controllers are fully funded. They are not part of the Department of Homeland Security. So I think that is not an issue here. It could be a communication issues between the tower and the truck. Again, they will listen to those recordings. Those are all recorded in the tower, all the frequencies. So that is one part of the investigation that investigators will be looking at.
And Jay, we all understand that this is very, very early, really the infant moments of the investigation. Again, 4 injured. Do we know anything about the significance of those injuries? Have folks been taken to the hospital? Do we know if they're being treated on the scene? Too soon to tell. Too soon to tell. All right, Jay, thank you so much. We know you'll keep us posted if you have anything else. We want to now go to our NBC affiliate here in New York, WNBC, and find out what they can share as they are on the scene and have more information.
Complaints by the Air Traffic Controls Union that they are not staffed fully enough. It is far too soon to know whether staffing had anything to do with what took place here tonight. Again, you had weather, you had questions too at this hour, as this, again, crash taking place more than an hour ago of this Air Canada flight coming in and colliding with. Again, we're really trying to learn more about the incident and, more importantly, about the passengers, crews, and staffers who are on the ground and their conditions. But we were told at least 4 people injured, 2 of them police officers, 2 of them en route to a hospital, and we await an update if they're on their conditions and if there are any fatalities.
Okay. All right, Jonathan, thank you so much. We'll continue to cover this story, and we'll break in when necessary to give you updates. Again,
All right, we've been listening in live to NBC4 New York's coverage of a very scary, chaotic incident that happened at LaGuardia Airport in New York City just about an hour ago now. An Air Canada flight coming from Montreal colliding with some sort of Port Authority vehicle on the runway at LaGuardia Airport. We now want to bring in now NBC News aviation analyst Jeff Gazzetti with more information. Jeff, thank you for joining us tonight. As you watch these pictures, this video that we have on our air right now, what are you able to sort of glean about the situation? We know 4 injured. We just heard our NBC local correspondents say 2 are police officers. We could presume the other 2 are passengers. What else are you hearing?
Well, it's a CRJ 900, so that's one of the a regional jet. It's a smaller jet. And still not sure whether it collided on the runway or the taxiway. We know it was the airplane had just landed, and if the collision would have occurred right after landing, the airspeed is pretty significant at that point. But it could have collided as it was taxiing off the runway. We just don't know now. We don't know what type of vehicle it was. Did the vehicle have its emergency lights on, which it typically does whenever you've got Port Authority vehicles transiting the ground on the airport? But there's just very little known right now. Fortunately, the airplane it appears to be a low-speed impact, but it was certainly enough to do damage to the nose of the airplane and to this vehicle.
Jeff, give me a sense of when a plane is landing and when some sort of vehicle, whether it be Port Authority or another emergency vehicle, is on the runway or the taxi runway. What kind of communications are going on to both the pilot and the driver of that vehicle? Help us understand how perhaps there was, it seems, a major breakdown in communication and the communication that goes into allowing both the aircraft and the vehicle to be on the runway.
Yeah, well, communicating in the car, in the truck with the controllers. They need permission to cross taxiways and runways, and so they have to call for that permission. And it's the onus on both the vehicle driver and the air traffic controller in the tower at LaGuardia to be communicating with each other. That vehicle needs to follow the orders of the controller, just like any airplane would, to avoid this type of situation right here.
Jeff, let's talk about a CRJ 900. You said it's a regional jet, perhaps smaller than many of us will take, cross country or across the coast. But how many people can this sort of plane carry?
It can carry about 90 people, 90 to 100 people. It's a very common type of short route jet for shorter routes, and this would fit into that. Coming in from Montreal to LaGuardia is a short route. There's thousands of these airplanes operating every day in the United States and Canada. They're very reliable. This does not appear to be an airplane problem. It appears to be an operational issue involving either the pilot, the controller, or the vehicle driver. And there is a history of vehicle incursions that the FAA keeps tabs on. And usually it involves, just as you indicated, Jessica, breakdowns in communication between air traffic control and the ground vehicle.
And help us understand as well, there's a lot of angst right now, of course, about how the partial government shutdown is affecting TSA, for example. You can't go on social media or even watch the news without seeing those long security lines that are having a lot of people in panic right now. Would that have anything to do with what may have happened here tonight?
No, it would not. The current shutdown involving the Department of Homeland Security would really have no effect on what happened here. But, that said, previous government shutdowns involving FAA controllers, that could be an issue. Certainly air traffic control staffing is an issue nationwide. I don't know what LaGuardia's situation is like with staffing, but that's something that the NTSB and the FAA would look into. But the long lines at airports due to the TSA shutdown would really have nothing to do with this event.
Correct. TSA doesn't have anything to do with this. However, you wonder if people will see this and say more problems at the airport. We want to point out that really one has nothing to do with the other. LaGuardia Airport typically, we're told, has about 1,200 flights coming in and out each day. Air Canada, we know, operates to LaGuardia out of Toronto and Montreal. When you see an incident like this, it's of course scary. It of course gives folks watching some pause. But Jeff, can you give us a sense of how common, or really how uncommon, a situation like this is, given the
and a vehicle right after it landed? The FAA constantly tracks close calls or whenever they're on the ground. It's very rare, especially on the movement areas. I can't even think of the last time we had a collision on ground between an airplane and, because again, there are communications protocols, and you've got the flashing lights of the emergency vehicle need to be on when it's driving around the airport. So we just don't know what happened, how things broke down in this case, but it is a rare occurrence.
We know that LaGuardia is one of the 3 major commercial airports that serve the New York metro area. It is shut down at the moment. We're told a ground stop. How will a ground stop affect the traffic in and out as we head out of the weekend and into the new week? And also, Jeff, now that we're in this situation where we're in the infant stages of this investigation, take us into how this investigation now unfolds. Who arrives on scene? What kinds of questions are they asking? What are they looking at to find out where the failure happened?
Yeah, well, a ground stop is a serious thing. That means no airplanes are coming in and out of the airport. Now, it is early morning now, so it may not be much of an inconvenience. And it's my bet that they'll try to get LaGuardia opened as soon as possible for the morning rush. But it's a serious situation. LaGuardia is a smaller airport on a small footprint, so people are going to be dealing with that. In terms of the investigation, I'm sure that the NTSB is now on the phone, talking to local authorities, assembling their go team. It'll probably be a smaller team than usual, since things are a bit more known and it's on the ground at the airport. But you can bet the NTSB is going to immediately attempt to get any kind of closed-circuit television footage about what happened. They'll get the flight recorders pulled from the CRJ, the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder, and they'll begin to get their people in place for examining the wreckage in earnest, in a few hours after their investigators have an opportunity to travel.
And apologize if I missed it. There's a lot happening on my end here, as I'm sure yours as well. Can you predict or guess how long the ground stop might occur?
I can't, but I can tell you that the airport is going to be very keen. Everyone is going to want to get that airport opened again so as not to inconvenience passengers. So I think that there's probably already discussions in place to photograph the airplane and get it moved off the runway or get that ground stop lifted. I predict it'll be a matter of hours, not days.
Just to recap the breaking news situation happening at New York's LaGuardia Airport right now, an Air Canada flight coming from Montreal late Sunday night collided with a Port Authority vehicle either on the runway or the taxiway at LaGuardia Airport. There is a ground stop at that airport right now. We're now learning that there were 76 passengers on board, plus 4 crew members. We know of 4 injuries, including 2 police officers. At this point, no deaths that we are aware of. We've been talking to Jeff Gazzetti. He's an NBC News aviation analyst. Jeff, as you look at this video that we're showing right now, are you able to tell how far the plane would have been from the gate when this happened?
No, but it looks like it was pretty far from the gate. This event occurred right after the CRJ 900 landed. And again, I don't know if it collided with the Port Authority vehicle on the runway during the landing roll, or whether it was on the taxiway as it was taxiing to the gate. But likewise, you know, it was certainly not in the ramp area. It was many hundred yards away from the gate.
When you look at these pictures, are you able to, I'm looking to see if we can see any of the injured or anything like that. We do know that there were 2 police officers injured. I'm unable to see the actual people being tended to. But Jeff, give us a sense when we talk about vehicles on the runway or the taxiway, what those vehicles might be and why they might be there. We know that it was some sort of Port Authority vehicle. So for folks who are unfamiliar with the job of the Port Authority, what sort of vehicles might they have on the runway or taxiway as a plane is coming in?
Well, Port Authority vehicles, airport management type vehicles can be, it could be a large fire truck, or it could just be a small 4-door sedan that carry airport managers or airport specialists that drive around and make sure that the runways and the taxiways are clear. It could be an exercise where the rescue personnel are just training on how to get around the airport at night. Or the emergency equipment could have been requested by the pilot of the airplane or of an airplane that landed and is requesting assistance, whether it be like an engine fire or some sort of emergency. The crew of the airplane can radio ahead to make sure they've got assets available. But this might just be a regular 4-door sedan that was driving around checking for runway condition.
Jeff, appreciate your insight tonight. Jeff Gazzetti, an NBC News aviation analyst. We appreciate your time. And that concludes this breaking news report of an Air Canada flight coming in from Montreal colliding with a vehicle, a Port Authority vehicle, on the taxiway or the runway at LaGuardia Airport.
We thank you for watching, and remember, stay updated on breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or watch live on our YouTube channel.